Just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I'm Scott Eames with the Mansfield Rotary Club. And before we start, I just want to say some thank yous for our host, Mansfield Public Schools, and Teresa Murphy, our moderator tonight, and for the entire panel for taking time to come out and discuss this important issue. Teresa?
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, folks, for coming out this evening. When Fire Chief Bolgagini and Police Chief Sellon asked the schools to partner with them and with the Rotary Club in this event, we were very happy to. And so we're very appreciative that you've come out to spend a little while with us to learn about this important topic. And I would like to mention Scott Eames, who is here representing the Rotary Club, and many members of the Rotary Club who have supported this event financially and being here and the time they've given for this event. Again, what I'd like to do is go through and just have everyone have an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then we'll begin our presentations.
Good evening. I'm Neil Bolgagini, the Fire Chief.
Ron Sellon, the Police Chief.
My name's Steve Spiukowski. I'm a Mansfield resident. I'm a probation officer in Rentham District Court, and I'm also on the Board of Directors for the Safe Coalition.
My name's Jim Derrick. I am a dad, first and foremost, and I'm also the president of the Safe Coalition.
My name's Mike Valkanis. I'm an emergency room physician at Norwood Hospital.
Thank you. And so what we have here is a variety of resources available to you. We have police, fire, we have the courts, we have the Safe Coalition, which will share their resources, and we have Dr. Valkanis, who will talk about the medical component if any of you have questions in that regard. So again, thank you very much. We are going to start with Chief Bolgagini and Chief Sellon to help you understand the problem that we're addressing this evening.
Thank you, Teresa. So what we've done is we've taken a really introspective look at our community, taken a look at Mansfield, and said, what's really going on here? And when we came up with our numbers, we felt like it was something we wanted to share with all of you. So you understood what this big, broad thing that we see on the news every day that some of us experience, a lot of us sadly experience, but what it means here in our town. So in our town, I mean, nationwide, I'll start that. You can see with nationwide, we're looking at deaths skyrocketing. Every chart that we see going back several years is always going upwards. Nationwide, in 2017, 66,000 drug overdose deaths. That's more than the city of Attleboro. That's difficult. That's a number that's bigger than the amount of deaths we experienced in the military level in Vietnam. That's amazing. And over the last 5 years, biggest increases here in Massachusetts. We're one of the top. Something that we have to take note of. And that's despite the fact that we have an incredible array of facilities and mental health professionals here in Massachusetts. One of the biggest numbers of mental health facilities and people here in our own little state. So what do they mean? It means the deaths are going up, as you can see. Just simply put. Nationwide, 125 people a day die from opiate deaths. There's 45,000 deaths, same as automobile and guns. That's a difficult number to swallow. Excuse me. Okay, good. Again, I don't want to bore you with statistics, but really what we're looking at here is we're looking at an upward trend no matter where we go. One of the things of note here is that nearly 257 million prescriptions for opiates were written in 2009 alone. That's several years ago. That's a lot of prescriptions. And here's a little fact that's not up there. If you're on opiates for 5 days, they prescribe you have a serious injury, and you're on them consistently for 5 days, there's a 45% chance you could become an addict. That's a staggering thought, isn't it? So one of the things that we've done is reach out to the legislature and said, we need to really work on this. And we're lucky enough to have doctors like Dr. Valkanis who really take a look at this stuff and are advocates to make sure that we're not handing these out like candy. So what's the immediate danger from opiates? We hear about it all the time. What really is going on here? So opiates cause a respiratory depression, and that causes brain damage or death. Pretty simple. You stop breathing and you die. That's what opiates do. And they take a lot of different forms. As you can see up in this chart here, there's a lot of things you might even have in your house. Oxycodone, things that you've prescribed on for a serious injury, tooth issues, disabilities that you might have, that somebody in your house might have. These are some of the things we find in our cabinets. And all of it is essentially the same thing that we're talking about when we talk about heroin. Heroin's the word, but opiates are really, really, truly what the problem is. Heroin, that's the illegal opiate. And that can be injected, it can be snorted, and it can be smoked. So addiction is really, truly, it's just something that comes on us. That's a tolerance or addiction may occur, requiring increasing doses for the same effect. Well, so in essence, really what we're talking about here is you build up a tolerance to the drug, and then you move forward and you need more, and then you need more, and then you need more. And as we see with our addicts out in the field, that's really what's going on. They're constantly going for more and more and more, and it becomes the opiates that they were using become too pricey for them, and now they go to heroin, because heroin is incredibly cheap. Heroin is cheaper than marijuana. So it's an easy thing for them to get, and it gets them the best high. And when we talk about addicts, we're talking about drowsiness and itchy, dry mouth. All those things that you see right there are pretty quick signs that you are dealing with an addict. Well, who's at risk? People demonstrating drug-seeking behavior, right? We see people all the time. We get people all the time who need to go to the hospital, and, well, you know what? We really don't know what their injury is. But we do suspect that they're going to the hospital so that they can fill their drug prescriptions. They got high-dose users. We've got prescription painkiller users. That's often not their own prescription. Consider where your prescriptions are in your home. Consider your medicine cabinet. How many people have access to your bathrooms? How many friends of your sons and daughters? How many relatives? So an addict that you don't know could easily be going through your stuff and taking your prescription, or your parents, or your aunts, or your other relatives. We got IV drug users, over-medicated elderly patients. We have a lot of elderly in our community, and frankly, they go home to nobody. And while addiction is a stigma that is with a different part of society, we consider it a young thing, we have a lot of elderly people who, frankly, have gotten into a very, very bad situation because they haven't been able to regulate themselves. So that's out there. We got patients with pain-relieving patches, children with access to prescription painkillers. Again, if you know what's in your house, you know that it's out there, other people know it too. So non-fatal overdose, the target population for Narcan, for those who use opiates as substance abuse and use respiratory drivers at a life-threatening level. So essentially, we're heading out into the community, and when we get a call for somebody overdosing, we're going to be bringing in Narcan with us. And we work in tandem. Police and fire arrive almost simultaneously at these calls. Police typically beat us in by a minute or so. They make sure the airway is open, they make sure things are going right, they're doing CPR, and the second we get there, we give the Narcan. So what is Narcan? Essentially, it's a drug that affects the central nervous system and reverses the depression. All right? In essence, really, truly, what it does, excuse me, is it blocks the ability of the heroin to get into your system. If you look up here, you can see the heroin really just wants to get into your nerve receptors. Well, Narcan essentially slips in and protects it, puts a cover over it, and doesn't allow that to happen. So that's how Narcan works. We take it and we use Narcan, and we have this atomizer, we put it on the end of the syringe, and we take it and it goes up the nose. So they get a mist, a fine mist, it goes directly into the system, directly into the nervous system, and we're blocking now the heroin from getting in. But it's not without risk. So heroin we've seen, Narcan we've seen all over the place. It's a wonder drug. It's amazing. We see people who are absolutely dead, and we can bring them back, and we do it with Narcan. But it has its own risks. We see Narcan out in the community, And one of the risks we see out in the community is it produces other issues in your body. Your heart can race, tachycardia. You can have seizures, hypertension, high blood pressure, hypotension. Your blood pressure drops down, and cardiac dysrhythmias. So there are a lot of things about Narcan that people really just don't hear about because we talk about it like, hey, if we have Narcan, we're going to be okay. That's not necessarily true. First of all, there are issues with it, and secondly, Narcan doesn't last forever. Narcan has about a 20-minute lifespan, and then guess what? The heroin starts taking effect again. And if somebody on their own has taken the Narcan and not called 911, what do you think their next step is going to be? Well, you know what? I'm feeling pretty good. I think I'm going to try it again. And now they've double dosed themselves. So a real big problem that we have is a regulation of people who have the Narcan that's accessible and not calling 911. We just ran into that the other day. We went for a call for a person not breathing. It was an overdose. We got there. We administered Narcan. They had Narcan there, but they had just given it to somebody else a couple hours earlier, and that person had left. So it's a wonder drug, but it does have some downsides to it. So what's happening here in Mansfield? So we took a look back to 2013. That's when we really started to look at our stats. During that time, on the fire side, we did 14,000 calls, 4,000 of those are fire calls, 4,700 medical calls. Busy little place, right? Busy little town. And police, they did 37,000 calls. That's over one person per day in the town. That's amazing stuff. So the number of overdoses in Mansfield, we had 108 of our medical runs were related to overdoses. 89 we went to sturdy, as you can see the breakdown. So 1.45% of all of our runs were related to an overdose. All right, okay. And who is it affecting? Our average life, or our average age of the people that we went out there for, were anywhere from 19 to 35. So the good news is we're not seeing it here. We have not come here, I'm going to knock on wood, we have not come here for an overdose in using heroin at all. So great news for us. The downside is, at 19 is the next day, right? In the grand scheme of things, it's a blink. So 19 to 35, those are the people that we're seeing. What are they taking? They're taking a lot of prescription drugs, alcohol, street drugs. On 36 of these overdoses, heroin was noted in the report. So it's out there. Sorry. We also see, boy, I've really messed it up here. Sorry. Okay, here we go. So we broke them down into 4 categories. We have street drugs, prescription drugs. We have polydrugs, which means they're taking a lot of different kind of drugs. And then we have non-viable patients. So of those, we had 27 transports. All patients survived for the street drugs and alcohol. 16 of those, heroin, were mentioned in the report. In the chemical, typically prescription drugs is what this means. 12 transports, 4 were also taking heroin. They all survived. Polydrug, taking a lot of different kind of drugs. 16 transports, all patients survived. 3 heroin. We're seeing kind of a routine here, that heroin is part of a drug culture, that there are other drugs that lead to heroin, there are other drugs that are mixed in with heroin. And then finally, on non-viable patients. Only 4 incidents. We got there and the person was absolutely non-viable. We could not rescue them no matter what we did. So unfortunately, those people, they were actually still had the needles in their arms. So where's it being used? It's on the streets, right? It's in a rundown hotel, right? It's out on the hotels we see on Forbes Boulevard. Nope, it's not. It's everywhere. Border to border, from the richest to the poorest, out on the streets, in the best homes that we have, with the best people we have, to the people who struggle every day. That's where this is. It's everywhere. Again, 19 to 35. No comfort in this. We're not alone. When we take a look at just our stuff, back when we took a look at this very first picture of our community and what we looked at for overdoses here in our community, this is what it looked like. Several years later, it looked a little bit like this. Getting busier, isn't it? A lot of heroin out there. Finally, when we look around us, in all our neighboring communities, these are the numbers there. This is staggering stuff. So we're not alone. They're with you. They're right next to you. They may be even your house. They're good people. We've been to places, I know some families who are just, they couldn't be nicer families. Collectively as a family, give and give and give, part of churches, part of helping people all the time, volunteer all the time. They have a daughter who's a heroin addict. She cannot break it. She's a wonderful girl. I've seen other kids. Kid I went to high school, not in this town, he was from another town, one of the best athletes I've ever seen in my life. Could throw a baseball through a wall. You know where I saw him a couple of years ago? It's outside of Dunkin' Donuts here in town. Heroin addict. He was begging for coins. It's a sad, sad thing, and it can happen to any of us. Well, what are we doing? Well, this is where we're going to hand it over to the police chief. He's going to talk a little bit about what it is we're trying to do.
Thanks. A big thing that, something that my profession is not very good at is acknowledging where we are ineffective entirely. And as we look backwards, as we take a look at what we've been dealing with as far as the so-called quote-unquote war on drugs, the one thing that we find is that we keep going back over and over and over again, and we keep trying to deal with the same people over and over and over again. And what we're finding is that the definition of insanity is what? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. The fact is that as we were increasing our quote-unquote enforcement, we were also seeing staggering increases with regards to our overdoses at the same time. What we're seeing right now is a paradigm shift in the profession, because what we realized is that we're not going to arrest our way out of this problem. Because what we were finding is that we were arresting people, they were going away, they were coming back, and then they were just falling right back into the same habits all over again. And that what we needed to do was to shift our entire paradigm with regards to the way that we saw and the way that we operated. So a few years back, thanks, just press the button. Okay. A few years back, what we did was, which button? That one? There we go. Yeah. Got it. We started off with establishing a problem-oriented policing unit. And the POP unit, as we call it, basically what it does is it takes a look at the calls for service. And it takes a look at where it is that we're going and where we're reacting and going to on a constant basis. Because, and I don't want to rehash the story too much, but basically going back to 1998, 99, myself and now Lieutenant Frank Archer were both patrol officers on the 4 to 12 shift. And we went back to the same residence 28 times, filing 51As with a family at the time in 1 year alone. Before we ended up going to a probate hearing with regards to it. Now, for those that don't know, if you file what's called a 51A, it's basically an allegation of abuse and neglect when it comes to a child. Now, he and I went there 28 times in 1 year, which means that that's once every 2 weeks thereabouts. And the reason why we were going there is because they had significant alcohol issues, they had significant drug issues, but we just kept going back over and over and over again. And I remember going back to the shift sergeant at the time and saying, look at this, we keep going back to this place over and over again. And it's like Groundhog Day. There has to be a better way about going about doing this. And I remember being in his own way, he told me basically to get back in the car, answer the next call, and keep my mouth shut. So those are the type of things that stick with you because of the fact that we have to be in the business of constantly refining our practice, and we need to be in the business of constantly redefining ourselves because what we're dealing with is people's lives. The problem-oriented policing unit, what it does is after every single overdose now, we have our POP team basically, which is a series of officers, does a follow-up. See, the traditional model of doing a follow-up when it comes to an overdose went basically along these lines. We would show up, fire department, we would administer Narcan. If they were breathing great, they go into the ambulance, off they go. We did an incident report and we left it at that. Now what happens is that there's a mandatory follow-up by the POP team. And that POP team basically does the follow-up because effectively what we want to do is that what we want to eventually do is work with other groups and coalitions to put the family back in the driver's seat, because the addict effectively is in the driver's seat for the most part. So what the POP team does is it actually works with the family. It meets with the family afterwards and talks to them, figures out exactly what the root cause of the problem is, and we work with them as well as other resources, which you're going to hear from in a few minutes, to try and give the family back control of the situation. In addition to that, what we've also done is we established partnerships with groups like the Safe Coalition and groups like Learning to Cope and the such. But effectively, it's a major crux of it. Is this your partner? Okay. A big part of it also comes down to the fact that what we also started doing is identifying, you know, there's something that we call the crime triangle, which basically says that you can't have a crime if you don't have a victim, an offender, and an opportunity. So what we needed to do is we realized that, all right, need to start figuring out a better way of handling the victim and quite frankly, the offender in some cases as well. So we established the POP team. Another part of it also is reducing opportunity. And reducing opportunity goes along these lines, the fact that we also have a drug drop box, thanks to the Bristol County District Attorney. And that drug drop box is basically, what we do is we try and limit the opportunity for it. Because what I saw previously, so prior to this, in detectives, what I saw was that people were basically, they'd start taking Percocets. They get hooked on Percocets until the habit is about probably $300 to $500 a day. Then they shift to heroin because it's so much cheaper. It's cheaper than marijuana right now. And then what ends up happening is that habit ends up building as well. So what we needed to do was reduce as much as possible the amount of opioids in the community. Ma'am, you have a question? Mm-hmm. So there's a whole side story with that, but basically, yeah, the long story short is that there were many, many nights that all of those had to do with, we were either arresting one or the other of the two guardians, and then arranging to have grandparents come and pick up the kids, and then they would go to the grandparents' house. We would call DCF, then it was DSS at the time. We would have the kids' custody transferred over to them. I'm a teacher, so I'm the ending reporter, so for me, just hearing that you file the same report over and over and over again. It's frustrating, trust me. Along those lines, though, basically, so essentially what we did, though, is that we also sought outside other organizations to help us as well. We also brought together other organizations such as, you know, establishing, you know, getting the Safe Coalition, getting Learning to Cope, so on and so forth, because basically, effectively what we're trying to do is we're trying to not just head things off, but we're also trying to build a coalition of people that are there to support people in the aftermath, and I'll sort of leave that for Jim Derrick and to talk about.
So, in essence, just really quickly, and we're going to leave most of this to these gentlemen here who really can touch on it good, but essentially we look at 4 stages of addiction. You have experimentation, social regular use, problem use, and then addiction and chemical dependency. And you know, I think we can probably in our own lives point to many people who we've seen in some form of these different stages. The problem for us is that we see them from the beginning stage to the end stage, and the end stage is really ugly. And it's a difficult thing to watch. And again, to harken back to what the chief said, it's about trying to build a system in which we can help these people before we hit that end stage. So that's really what we're trying to do. Excuse me, buddy, didn't mean to jump behind you. We have all sorts of different signs of heroin use. If you take a look at some of these things, you're going to see, you know, if you see some of these things around your house, burned spoons and tiny baggies, dark, sticky residue, those are all signs that heroin was there. That's a telltale sign that you had heroin. the appearance of the person. They have tiny pupils, they're very constricted, sleepy eyes, tendency to nod off, slow breathing, flushed skin. And they have certain actions. Obviously, they're vomiting, they're sick all the time, they're scratching, they have slurred speech, constipation. I mean, just things like this. You may not see every single one of these, but you are going to see some of these things. I want to drop this off now to the gentlemen who are here with us. And I'm sorry if we pushed through as quickly as we could. We wanted to give you an overview of Mansfield. We wanted to give you an overview that told you we're working hard to try to do something here. We see a problem that we just could not get around. We couldn't do anything but react to it. We wanted to do more. So we were really lucky that Scott and these gentlemen joined with us and really, truly, I think, are going to make a difference. So I'm going to hand it back over to the chief now.
So effectively, the way that it works now, and this is the one thing that we kind of figured out, is that when our officers respond to an overdose now we have a follow-up by POP. But what we also figured out is that, okay, this person's going to the hospital, but more than likely they're going to be discharged. The problem that we have now is that we need to figure out exactly what's going to happen with that person post, what's going to happen with them long-term. And this is where organizations like Jim's actually come into play, and they are critically important to us because they're the organizations, long story short, that have the volunteers to help find the beds for the addicts for us. But the one thing that they lack is funding, and that's where Scott and the Rotary Club come into play, and they've been that's where the partnership all revolves into is that basically the Rotary Club is providing them with the financial support so that they can provide us with the support of identifying where the beds are, and then we can get people to the help that they need as opposed to having them sitting in a jail cell somewhere. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jim Derrick.
Great, thank you.
Skippy leg, I'm hoping the doctor will see me afterwards for a mild copay. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? In the back? Okay, great. I'm not a big fan of microphones, so. I first of all want to commend you. I'm a Franklin resident, and the Safe Coalition represents technically our catchment area is the Rentham District Court area. So you may ask why we're here. We're here because of your fire chief, police chief, school superintendent, your state representative, and people that have come forward and said to us, we want to help you help us. We want to get engaged. We're concerned about our town. I have to give all of you tremendous credit. And listen, we work, Steve and I, we work, how many of these have we done in various towns? All the way from Medway through Plainville, through Norfolk to Walpole. I'm telling you right now, Mansfield, this group of people in front of you, the superintendent for having this here, the Rotary clubs, this town is leading the charge right now, along with Franklin, quite frankly. And I say that because, not just because I live there, because Chief Lynch and the fire chief are very much like-minded. So I can't let that go without saying that. You're very, very, very fortunate. So now that I've said that, I'm going to tell you a personal story about me. I'm guessing that there are some people here that are here because they're afraid. They're afraid of what could happen to their loved one. They're afraid that maybe their son or daughter is using. They don't know what they're using. Maybe somebody in the audience here is wondering whether or not they may be an addict. And let's forget opioids for a second. Let's just talk addiction. I was you. I sat in the high school auditorium and listened to these talks and said to myself, not me, I feel so bad for these people. It's terrible what's going to happen to them. I coach baseball. I coached Little League for almost 30 years. You know, I was the guy that was playing flag football with the kids in the neighborhood. Well, I'm no hero. There's plenty of you guys and women that do that, okay? I was the guy with the kids that were always getting the compliments at how handsome and polite they were. And I knew that if I just kept shining those little kid apples, I just shined them up and put them on the school bus, I'm telling you what, it doesn't happen to people like me. It doesn't. How could it? Both their grandparents are alive on both sides. We have wonderful Thanksgivings. We play football in the backyard. You know, Never been any abuse in our home. I have a couple of beers here and there. I never overdrank. I've never smoked pot. That's not true. I actually inhaled in college. I beg your pardon, I hated it. But other than that, really nothing to see here. Backtrack a little bit, because what the department did a minute ago was give you the opioid-related statistics, which they should. They are triaging the #1 health epidemic in this nation. Our nation consumes 85% of all prescription painkillers manufactured in the world. Can you imagine that? Why is that? Are we in 85% more pain? No, because of marketing. And that's a whole nother story. There's a great book by Sam Quinones called Dreamland. If you read it, you'll be able to see the escalation of heroin and how it follows along with our increased Purdue Pharma and the rest of them that marketed to our doctors that pain medication was safe. Opioids were safe to prescribe before you were maybe practicing. So my story is this. My son, at 13 years of age, was struggling with anxiety and I won't ask for hands, but just think about that. I assume there's some teachers here, superintendent, there's educators, we're all people. Who hasn't seen a young child suffering with anxiety, depression, they don't quite fit in? You start getting those calls home, and they start acting out, and you say, well, I'm going to bring them to a psychologist. That was, 13 years ago. So I brought him to a psychologist, and he referred us to a psychiatrist, and a psychiatrist did his job, which at the time was to prescribe him for his panic attacks benzodiazepine, which is better known as Xanax, Klonopin, lorazepam, in that classification of drugs. So he's on anxiety meds at a very young age. Not uncommon. It's still not uncommon. Then he starts smoking weed. Okay? He has self-reported to me since then that he started smoking weed because he felt like he didn't fit in anywhere. He didn't fit in anywhere, and the kids that he could find a group with were the kids that were getting high. So unbeknownst to me, while I'm out playing ball with him in the backyard, he may have just smoked a joint. And you're probably thinking, what kind of an idiot parent could let their kids... And you know what? I get that. I get that, especially if you have young kids. I understand that thought process. Trust me. You'll have to take a leap of trust. We were on top of these guys. They didn't go to houses without us calling. I drove up and walked in the door. Hi, Jim Derrick, so nice to meet you. Let me look around the house. You know, I did all of that. I did the best I could with what I had at the time I had it. Little did I know he was self-medicating for the anxiety. All of a sudden the benzos go away with weed. So people often say, well, you think weed's a gateway drug? No, not necessarily. But I think behavior can show you a possible gateway to a problem. So back when a superintendent of a public school system starts seeing a young child in middle school struggling, that may be an early indication that there could be somebody that could want to self-medicate later on. As my son grew, he developed into the poly phase of basically taking everything he could possibly get his hands on. Could I see it? Absolutely. Could I stop him? Absolutely not. You're probably wondering why not. He's a kid. Why can't you stop him? You can just lock him in the house. You can ground him. He became an addict. He became addicted to marijuana. Anybody that says that marijuana is non-addictive, that's like saying gambling's not addictive. That's like saying food's not addictive. Everything can be addictive when used to medicate, to self-medicate. Does marijuana do damage to your brain? I am not an expert. The initials at the end of my name are DAD. I've lived it. Yes, it damaged his brain. He was using 3 and 4 times a day, smoking weed. He then morphed into Molly, or ecstasy. He then morphed into benzodiazepine again, taking enormous amounts of Xanax. And I could go on and on about the turmoil in the house. This ripped my family apart. It really did. It ripped us apart. And on March 23rd of 2015, he was doing 90 miles an hour on Lincoln Street in Franklin, Massachusetts, a small country town. He had twice the legal limit of alcohol in his system. He had marijuana in his system. He had ecstasy in his system. And he had heroin in his system. He rolled the car over, he barrel rolled it, he was ejected 150 feet, he landed in the field, he had no pulse and respiration, and by a miracle of God, an officer-duty EMT by the name of Matt Hendon, who 31 years of age, pulled over, had his kit with him, found him, bagged him up, got the air transit started, and they rescued him. But I did get the knock on the door saying, Mr. Derrick, your son is on the way and by helicopter to UMass Medical, and we don't think he's gonna make it. It was the longest night of my life. And for 8 weeks, he was in a coma, unresponsive. He coded a number of times in the UMass Medical Trauma Center. So why do I tell you that story? And let me finish the story before, because oftentimes I forget to finish it. After that, he came out of it and he said, after he was in the physical rehab, where he learned to talk and walk again, which took another 6 to 8 weeks, and it was amazing to me, the plasticity of the brain with the injuries he had. He broke almost every bone in his face and his body. I said, Jack, you need to go to rehab. You're an addict. He looked at me and said, I'm not an addict. I was just partying. That's addiction. Addiction's an illness that tells you you're not sick. So while we're here tonight to talk about opioids, and that's certainly an enormous part of this, I wanted to share with you my personal story. My son did go into rehab. We had an intervention. He's been to 3 since then. And I got a call, I forgot what night, Thursday night, that he overdosed down at a halfway house in Florida. He lived, but he is now back to, maybe not square one, but he's on the streets, okay? This is a horrible illness. That's my personal story, and I share it not to tell you that as we opened with, this can and does happen. I believe I'm a really good dad. I have my faults, but I think I'm a really good dad. I love his mom. She's my ex-wife. She does a wonderful job with him. My wife does a wonderful job. We're good people, but it happened. And I'm not alone. The statistics bear it out. So, I came to a meeting like this when there was a particularly big rash of overdoses in Franklin, and Chief Lynch, actually the chief just preceding Lynch and state representative put on a panel, not unlike this, and I sat in the audience. I was so frightened to walk in because I was like, oh man, I don't want anybody knowing I'm thinking I'm here because I have an addict in my family. I still hadn't told anybody. I was telling people Jack's just off track, How's Mike? Oh, he's great. Is it Bryant? How's Jack? Hey, he'll get there someday. Because there's so much stigma. It's such an isolating disease. You don't want to admit it, or at least I didn't. And most people feel today, happily, it's lifting. So there was a panel, and a coalition was born. So what is the SAFE Coalition? That's really what I wanted to transition to. I am so blessed to be surrounded by people like Steve Spiewakowski, Jordan Warnock up back, who's our treasurer, Mary Graham Louise, and 13 other board members, and 40 people that come to our meetings and volunteer on a regular basis. What a coalition is it brings together stakeholders. Could you push that forward a couple? That's okay, I'll just say it. It brings together key stakeholders, okay, to break down silos. So, what a coalition does is it takes fire, police, government, courts, schools, citizens like me, people in long-term recovery, clergy, treatment centers. It takes all those people that are normally siloed and sort of dealing with the problem over here and puts them in one room around a table and says, just like other coalitions, right, Jay, that you have in government, and says, okay, let's work on this common problem that we're facing together. Let's break the silos down. What's working for you, and how can what I know about what's going on in your world, how can I help you? And vice versa. And so that's what a coalition's designed to do. And we came together around that concept, and it worked really, really well. We were born on, June 30th of 2015. We incorporated in December of 2015 as a 501c3. And our three big goals. Our first and most important goal is triage, right? You have people dying at a rate that's unprecedented for any type of illness. This is the #1 health epidemic in our country. So the first goal is to reduce the barriers to treatment. When my son was an addict, I had no idea who to call. Who do you call? You call Malibu Beaches or whatever that thing is on TV? There's no, I don't, if he had cancer or diabetes, I can drive downtown and look up and see JDRF, or I can see Dana-Farber, but I don't see addiction, right? I called his pediatrician, really, really nice guy. Couldn't help me. I asked an ER doc. I'm just not sure. So what we do is we exist to help break down the barriers to treatment, the barriers to treatment, which means we have a resource line that you can call and get connected quickly with resources. Maybe find a detox bed, understand what the process is. This book rides around in your police cruisers and in the cruisers of the neighboring towns, and Steve Spiewakowski is the architect, and it's his brainchild. And God, I wish I'd had this book when I was dealing with my son. It's so simple, but it's so important. It's basically Addiction for Dummies. I hate to say that, but it takes you right through the process with all the important numbers. And when these guys leave it behind, somebody has a tool in their hand, including our phone number. The second thing we exist to do is to educate. So we work in partnership with schools, and we provide programming, all types of programming. And we hope to help do that with you. And we bring it in. Programming can be for prevention, it can be for education, it can be geared to middle school, high school students, parents alone, or a mix of combination of all of that. And then, very importantly, we work to destigmatize this. We work with the recovery community, and we show you what it looks like. Because fear is what separates most of us from understanding. You know what I mean by that? So if I'm afraid of something, it's a junkie, they're dirty, I wonder what kind of diseases they have. How the hell did they get there anyway? What kind of parents do they have? We bring in people that are in long-term recovery, and I'll tell you what, there's one in particular, I can use his full name because he speaks at schools all around for us. His name's Derek Getchell. And besides the fact that he looks like an Abercrombie and Fitch model, he coaches football at Dean College. He's only been clean for 5 years, clean and sober, but he works his program hard. He's teaching, getting his teaching certificate at Bridgewater, and he's employed by the Natick High Schools as a peer-to-peer mentor for kids that are at risk. He says to me, Jim, how'd that happen? But it does happen. So that's what we do. Those are the three main areas that we work. Here's what I'd like to leave you with. Your town is so motivated, the people in this room, right up here, to help the residents, to provide them with a bridge for help. We want to be a part of that solution because you've come in force and said, please help us. I'm going to correct one thing you said, forgive me. It's not funding that we lack, it's volunteers. Okay? So when we come to a town, we're asking that you bring us your time, talent, and yes, treasure's important. Thank you very much, Scott, because we are funded. The only two ways that we're funded, we got a state grant, thanks to our state representative, Jeffrey Roy. We're very appreciative of that. It's our second grant. And, but the rest of the money, almost 1-to-1. Is that about right? We've gotten $100,000 in grants in 2 years, and we've raised about $100,000. So that means our board is, on one hand, doing the work, all volunteer. We don't have any paid staff. We don't pay for any overhead, nothing. And on the other hand, we're raising money. So it's hard. It's hard work. But we have tremendously dedicated people. So what I'm asking for is if Mansfield would like an ongoing relationship with the Safe Coalition, which we would love to have, I'm asking for anybody that's motivated to dip their toe in the water. That doesn't mean you have to, take on the heaviest task and you're chained to a committee and, it's not that heavy. But we will share our meeting dates with you, dip your toe in and see if it's something that interests you. It's without a doubt been one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done. And thanks for letting me share. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. First, I want to thank everybody for being here. I know there's a lot going on in the world today. All the gun violence, the mental illness, substance abuse. A lot of stuff that's happened recently. And it's a testament to your commitment that you're out here today. I want to thank the two chiefs and Teresa for having Jim and I out tonight. I've been in criminal justice for about 30 years. And I know you're asking yourself, that can't be true. He doesn't look old enough. But I've been in criminal justice for about 30 years, and the job that I have right now, very much like Chief Sellon and Chief Boldragini, is not the same job that it was all those years ago. And one of the reasons is about 10 years ago, this epidemic hit us. In the building that I work in Rentham District Court, I began to see people come into my office and sit down in the chair next to my desk that were very much like my own children. These were kids that were high school athletes, and some of them were just very talented high school athletes. Cheerleaders who were very involved, in dance and cheerleading and football and lacrosse and basketball. Some of them who had experienced catastrophic injuries and started to take courses of opiates, Percocets, Vicodins, and perpetuated the cycle and eventually ended up involved with the courts because they were stealing or doing other things that were undesirable to feed their habits. So when the chiefs invited Jim and I to talk to them, and they started to talk about some of the statistics that they showed you up on the screen here earlier, all I could think was, this is my Mansfield? This is my town? This isn't Brockton. This isn't Fall River. This isn't Roxbury. These things are happening in Mansfield? Of course I have to do something. I have to help. And that's what these guys are doing. They see the problem. All the dots on the screen from 10 years ago that have multiplied by 10 times. And that's not because of what anybody is doing wrong. A lot of it's about the stigma of drug addiction and the lack of knowledge that everybody has about it. And that's why we're here to talk to you today. I want to throw out a couple of statistics to you, and I know you've heard a lot of these already, or a lot of statistics, but we throw them out there hoping that at least one will catch on with you, and it'll make you start to ask some questions. According to the American Society of Addictive Medicine in 2015, most adolescents who misuse pain relievers get them from a friend or a relative. And what that sometimes entails is somebody that's had a sports injury, who just ran their 2-week course of Percocets, wants to get back on the basketball court, tells their mom or dad that they're still in pain. Mom and dad have a prescription for Percocets left over from their last tooth pulling that they never threw into the trash. And they say, okay, well, I'll give you a couple to get you through the next practice. Or the kids just find it in the medicine cabinet, or they approach some of their friends to do some hunting for them just to reduce the pain. The prescription rates for opioids among adolescents and young adults nearly doubled between 1994 and 2007. Prescribers at that time, thanks to what Jim was talking about, Purdue Pharma, and how doctors were being trained, prescribers were being taught to treat pain as an illness. They had a happy face scale. I don't know if you've ever been to the doctor, a happy face scale where rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 6 or whatever it was, and one had the upside down frown, and a lot of people would choose number 1, so they'd walk out with a 30-day course of Percocet. 9 out of 10 addicts began using mind-altering substances before age 18. Jim talked about his son medicating with marijuana and overusing the benzos and the mollies, etc., all before the age of 18. When we talk about marijuana, it's legal. It's a mind-altering substance. Studies have shown that it alters the brain chemistry for adolescents under the age of 23. After 23, there's no conclusive studies, but up until the age of 23, it's shown to alter the adolescent neurological system. So anybody who says it's just marijuana, it is a gateway drug. Kids are using mind-altering substances to escape the anxiety of being in school or being with friends or just fitting in. Kids are using alcohol for the same reasons. Kids are dabbling with pills for the same reasons. It's their own insecurities, and that's the reason why they turn to this stuff. About 80% of the people who use heroin first misused prescription opiates. How many of you have gone to the dentist to have a root canal or have a tooth pulled? How many of you been offered prescriptions for Vicodin and a Percocet? Now, I just had 2 teeth pulled 6 months ago, and I told the doctor straight out, I don't want a prescription, and I was able to get through my pain, which lasted about 3 days, with Tylenol and Advil. There's just not a good reason to be prescribing those types of things. 21,000 adolescents have used heroin in the last year. So just some of those things to think about. What things that you can do in response to some of the things that we've been talking about. And really, what the most important one is talk to your kids. Ask them about their experiences at the school and with their friends. My kids went to Mansfield Public Schools. When this whole thing started to first develop, when I first became with the coalition in 2015, I had a son that was playing on sports teams in the Mansfield school system. And just out of curiosity, I approached him and I said, you don't have to give me names. Is there anybody in the locker room that's using any type of medication to stay on the field? And if you talk to me out there in the hallway afterwards, I'll give you the answer to that question, but I was not happy with the answer. So talk to your kids about what's going on in school. Like I said earlier, this starts early with feelings of not fitting in, inadequacy for kids, anxiety and depression, and trying to hide or cover up those feelings by using all these different substances. Nobody wakes up when they're 19 years old and says, I would love to be sticking a needle in my arm right now. Sometimes it's a slow progression, sometimes it's a very fast progression. When you're using opiates, it's a very fast progression. It can progress from pills to heroin in the snap of a finger because the addiction comes so fast and alters the neurological system so quickly. One of the main things that we're trying to do as a coalition, and one of the biggest barriers to seeking help and finding treatment, is the stigma of the whole thing. One of the things that I hope you take away from this gathering today is that, like Chief Boldragini was saying, some of the most beautiful houses in Mansfield, some of the most beautiful neighborhoods, some of the most well-to-do towns are dealing with this issue. I had a young man on probation a couple of years ago whose parents lived in an $800,000 house. They did many of the same things that Jim did. He was involved with school sports. His parents were doting. They spoiled him and his brother. You couldn't ask for a nicer, more involved family. He was dabbling with marijuana. He ended up on probation with me. It soon became, it was for an operating under the influence of alcohol. It soon became evident to me after meeting with him a few times. And he was the nicest kid in the world. And the reason that I was able to establish a rapport with him, I feel, is because he looked and acted like my own son. He had a lot of the same mannerisms of my middle son. He was polite, he was honest, he was a good kid. So I started to work with him around treatment. Long story short, After about 10 months in treatment of successful sobriety, he came home from home on a pass from a program out in California, and after one night left his beautiful $800,000 house in a body bag. And it was something that I never expected. And the reason that I wanted to tell you that story is for two reasons. One is it impacted me because this young man was the nicest kid. I never would have met him if he wasn't involved in the court system. His mannerisms were so much like my own kids. It made me feel, if this can happen to him, it can happen to me. It can happen to my kids. It can happen to anybody's children. So when you talk about destigmatization, try not to be so judgmental. One of the benefits of doing what I do is I get to sit down with people and listen to their stories. And let me tell you something, the more you hear about somebody's story and how they got to where they are, the less judgmental you're going to be about how they're there. So when somebody starts to talk about their child struggling with addiction or themselves struggling with addiction, try not to be so quick to say, oh, that's a bad kid. That's a bad kid. Or if it's, here's another one, even worse than that. It's not my kid, it's those kids that they're hanging around with. Let me tell you something. Every parent that I've talked to in relation to this epidemic blames it on somebody else's kid. If it's everybody else's kid, then your kid is somebody else's kid. So everybody's journey is different. They could have gotten there through wisdom teeth pain. They could have gotten there through tearing an ACL during a basketball game. They could have gotten there because they made a bad decision at a party that one time with a bunch of friends. It doesn't matter how they got there. Everybody deserves a chance for recovery. And the best thing that we can all do is just to try to listen to people, not be judgmental, and don't be afraid to reach out a helping hand to even just to lend a listening ear. The last thing that you could do, and Jim talked about it a little bit earlier, is get involved. I don't have any children. By the grace of God, I don't have any children that are struggling with this issue. I have extended family members that are. I have a lot of people that I know through my job that are. I have friends whose children are. Get involved. Get involved with our group or start your own coalition. Donate to a treatment program. Donate your time or talents to helping somebody that needs it. But by God, with everybody that's dying in this country and even in this town, if it was Eastern equine encephalitis, we'd have a full auditorium here. Okay, but it's not Eastern equine encephalitis, it's addiction, and there's a stigma. So reach out and help somebody. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate it. Thanks.
We have time for questions. So we have some microphones up in the front. In addition to the speakers who've already spoken, Dr. Valkanis is here. We also have Representative Jay Barrows who's here. If there's any questions that would be referring to any of our legislative questions or issues. So first of all, I invite anybody who would like to ask a question to come on up and join us. And then I'll also say that if there are some questions that you have that you would prefer to ask more privately, then we will be here after we finish, and you are most welcome to come up. So is there anybody who'd like to come up and join us with a question? Thank you. And whoever can, we'll have you ask, and then we'll see who can answer it best. Thank you.
I don't really have a question, but this kind of goes along with the two gentlemen who just spoke back to back. I grew up here in Mansfield, went to Jordan Jackson, QMS, MHS. Officer Khanna taught me DARE. As far as the education goes, I myself am recovering from heroin addiction. I was varsity captain of I was varsity captain cheerleading, varsity all 4 years, winter, and I have 8 varsity letters. My name is still on the plaques in the wall. Again, it doesn't discriminate. I always had a roof. I have loving parents. Like I said, I cheered. I was involved. At 16, I went to my first psychiatrist and walked out with Adderall, Xanax, Lamictal, citalopram, all in one visit. And that's where I think it starts, like right there, whereas kids, like you said, have issues, and it's the teachers and parents' job to notice it then. I'm not saying that would have saved me, because God has my, had my plan made out for me, and I'm still on that plan, whether I relapse tonight, a year, whatever, or not at all. But it does help if education is really big, because I always thought, like, oh, junkie, that's the toothless guy under the bridge. I didn't think, I didn't wake up and say, oh, at 19, I'm going to put a needle in my arm for the first time. I'll be 30 in July, and it's been a long road, but mine started with pretty much partying throughout high school, which everyone does. And I think that's important too, is to target the middle school and high school and show them real life stories of, it can happen to anyone. Because my idea of a drug user wasn't someone who occasionally smoked weed or drank or blew cocaine. It was the guy under the bridge in Boston, and it's not like that. And in DARE, we would put on the goggles, and after you left, we were like, oh my God, that's so fun, let's go get drunk. That's how DARE was. And it really was. We thought it was fun. This is what making drunk, this is what drunk is, let's go do it. And it's not. As far as marijuana, I'm kind of neutral on the marijuana. I don't really know if I don't think it's a gateway, but who knows? It wasn't for me, because my addiction started way before drugs. My behaviors were very addictive, whether it was men, whether it was partying, whether it was shopping, whether it was anything. I wanted to do it to the extreme. Took me a long time, going to Florida for almost 2 years to figure that out. And being able to come back to my hometown was extremely hard. Like you had just said, the guy that left his $8 million house or whatever. For the first month I was home, I didn't leave the house. I had such bad anxiety. And, but I think just relating to teenagers and, showing them that it can happen to anyone. And if you have a friend who is acting this way, then get involved. The well checks are awesome. As far as people overdosing, I keep Narcan in my car to this day. I don't hang out with people that use, but you never know. It could happen anywhere. But if you're gonna catch addicts too, another thing I can say is when they overdose, you need to be ready to have them agree to be treatment that day. Because once they leave that hospital, they could tell you, I hate my life, I wanna die, yes, I wanna get clean. But if they're leaving that hospital without going into somewhere, right from there, they're gonna use again. And no offense, cops, but we're not gonna come to you for treatment. We're not gonna go to you and ask you for help. It's gonna take hitting a rock bottom, whether that's jails, institution, death, overdose, anything. My parents, I can't tell you how many detoxes I've been in Massachusetts. The Section 35, which it mentions in the pamphlet, is awesome, but there's a lot of problems there too. I had a friend who just killed himself at MCI a few months, almost a year ago now, from Mansfield, who graduated with me. There's a lot of problems that Massachusetts needs to work on, but I think by the Safe Coalition, I think that's the right start. So just wanted to share. Thank you.
You're on our next panel, by the way. What is your first name? Krista. So, Christy, that's the embodiment of recovery, and that's the embodiment of courage. And, importantly, that's the voice that we need to be able to serve people so that they wind up like you and not like the statistics. You shared so much that was so important there, and one thing I wanted to say, I was in a school system right after this coalition started, and it wasn't here, it was in another town. And I was walking the hallways with the superintendent, and I said, we really like to help you out with some education and augment what you're doing in the health classes about substances. And she said, we don't have a heroin problem in the high schools. I said, that's great. I said, do you have a lung cancer problem in the high schools? She said, what? I said, well, then I assume if you don't have a lung cancer problem, why would you tell kids not to smoke? Why bother? Move on, use the time to do something else. Heroin addiction does not start in high school. Nobody, do you know anybody that Chief, have you come across a lot of kids using opioids in high school other than prescribed?
No.
For pain? No. It's the addictive traits that you just mentioned, and I cannot thank you enough for what you just said and the courage you just took to say that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to down. But you know, those are the recovery community is the community that we listen to the most, that we reach out to the most to say, help us help you, because you lived it and often are living it day by day by day. Thank you.
We don't have all the answers, and that's why we're here. We're reaching out to all of you, because we don't have all the answers, and we want to know what you need. That's why we're here.
And you're absolutely right. The traditional way of handling this matter was like, we can't fix this. Like, and acknowledging that is really difficult for our profession as a whole. But understanding that it's going to be about building bridges with organizations and coalitions and people that can help us with this problem. That's truly where we're going to end up finding the solution. But I can tell you from firsthand experience, there is no more difficult experience than looking a family member in the eye at 2 o'clock in the morning and saying, I'm not sure what can be done at this stage. Jim's group is exactly what we need at this time and at this moment, because they're the people that we can reach out to at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they'll actually begin the process, because you're absolutely right. Unless you get to the attic immediately, I've watched them go in one door, and I've watched them run right out the other door as soon as they're able to. And on the way to the hospital, that's all they want to talk about is how they're going to get clean, how they're going to do all this. Is the minute that they can, out the door they go. And it's that opportunity, it's that time frame that we need to seize on very quickly.
You mentioned that the police officers might not be the way that you go. Well, here's an idea that's in the formation stage that's already taking place in one part of the state that we're looking at launching, and this is the way people may be able to plug in, particularly in recovery. So what we're looking at potentially doing with communities, and Mansfield may be one of them, and we've already started, we're pretty far downstream with this, is putting together a clinical social worker, a person in long-term recovery that has their recovery coach certification, and a plainclothes police officer simply to take us to the residence and then back away. Working with somebody who has recently overdosed who's at risk, because you're right. That's the bridge, and you have that window's like this big. And we want to be able to deploy that type of triage as quickly as possible. But we need volunteers to do that.
The law in the book says that if they're not going to allow you into that facility, that they're supposed to direct you to an appropriate facility. I know that it's not being done. Does anybody in the room who does get turned away from detox because they're not dirty? Don't make yourself dirty, please. Don't have a drink, don't take a pill, don't take a dose. Go to the emergency room. Sometimes you can do that. It's just like, you have to be a good advocate for yourself, and unfortunately, and I mean, I've been in that position where you have to sit there and you have to stick to your guns and you have to say, hey, listen, doctor, if you let me walk out that door right now, I'm going to go use, and I'm probably going to overdose, and if I die, my family's coming after this hospital.
They sent me away with a prescription of Clonidine and something for my stomach, and with the list of Massachusetts detoxes.
How long ago?
4 or 5 years ago.
Right. So, I mean, it's things still are in the change process. A lot has changed since that. People obviously are more hip to what's going on with the process. Some of the hospitals have been slow coming around. Some have not. But just like with any other illness, if you feel like something's not right, you do need to be a good advocate for yourself at the hospital, if that's where you end up. You know, the other part is the whole Section 35 process. A lot of the laws have changed over the last couple of years on Section 35. Section 35, I'm sorry, for those of you who don't know, and I know you talked about it a little bit, is the civil commitment process in Massachusetts. You have to be a blood relative or a spouse to file, and you would go to a civil clerk's office, you can go to any civil clerk's office depending on where the person lives, and you can petition for a person to be involuntarily committed because you feel that they've put themselves at risk because of substance abuse. When the law was originally written, it was written for people with alcohol problems. So much has changed since the law was written. Most of the people that come into my court to petition for Section 35 for involuntary commitment are there because of the whole opiate epidemic. There are 4 facilities in Massachusetts that one can get Section 2. There's the Men's Addiction Treatment Center in Brockton. There is WATSI is, I think, in Fall River. Is women. There's one in Taunton. It's a brand new facility for women, and then there's the one in Plymouth for men. It used to be, and I heard you say this, I don't want my daughter to go to Brockton for detox because there's one of the issues with the programming was exactly what you were saying earlier, and that there's not enough of them. And so, you know, when I run into people that that I'm dealing with that are struggling whether or not their daughter should go to the STAR program in Fall River or go to Gosnold, first thing I ask them is, can you private pay? And most people cannot private pay. They're not going to send their child to Crossroads in Aruba, the Eric Clapton program. You know, they don't have the money for that, and so.
You want to real quick that at the end of the day, you're not there for a comfortable bed and.
Thank you for saying.
You're there to get clean.
Exactly. And if you're not ready, you're not ready, right?
No, only myself.
Doesn't matter where you, I mean, there are people that come through those types of programs that you're talking about that are successful, and there's some that aren't.
Just for myself. You know, like, yes, I want to get help, yes, and just go there just to please them.
Yeah.
And get out and go right back to you.
Yeah, I just want to say that one of the reasons why the coalition exists is to stop some of this cycle. What you went through is horrible, unjust, and just flat out wrong, and jeopardized your life, both of your lives. And it can't exist. Here's 2 things that we can do. One is we can advocate, okay? Because we work with treatment providers. We go into the treatment providers. We have relationships with them. So we can call on your behalf. 2 is that our board is populated with state representatives and town officials and lawyers, people that know the system and that will advocate for you. And I would submit to you that Jay Barrows would do that for you in a heartbeat, because everything you just talked about is absolutely wrong. And I can tell you the landscape has changed. The one thing that hasn't changed is insurance parity, and this is a pet peeve of mine. Mental health parity and addiction parity were signed into federal law in 2008, and to date, now, there are no carriers that are upholding that unless they do it voluntarily, okay? Nobody's holding their feet to the fire, and this is the next big battle for us, because when my son went into treatment, I got 14 days of coverage and $70,000 out of pocket to treat him, of money that I didn't have. So, editorial off. Thank you.
We have another question.
Hi, my name is Sophia. I am a pharmacist, recently graduated in the past few years. As a student, I did intern at one of our local pharmacies in town, and something that I noticed is, well, you know, you get patients filling prescriptions, and you don't know who's using it for pain and who's using it for uses other than pain. And one of the worst things as a student is to find out later reading somebody's obituary, you know, thinking that you're helping a patient, and the very patients that you thought you were treating, you're actually indirectly feeding their addiction, and it's hard to go to bed at night as a student realizing that you may have played a part in that. So my question is, are there any projects or efforts to partner up with local pharmacies and doctors' offices to help approach this issue?
Dr. McDonald's going to take that?
There's a lot of efforts to curb the problem. One of the big pushes right now is the prescription monitoring program we're all required as physicians to, every time you come into the emergency department, if we are to prescribe you a narcotic, we look you up on a website, and we can look up any number of states around there, and we can see every pharmacy that's written you a prescription over the last several years. And by doing that, we can tell we can track you if you're doctor shopping, if you're looking for narcotics, you're getting different narcotics from different areas. And then we can what I do, if someone comes in with a questionable diagnosis or something, I'll look them up before I even go in the room, and I'll have that with me, so that I can just show it to them. And what I tell a lot of the patients now, they come with back pain, I have to make a judgment at that point clinically. Is this a legitimate pain issue or not a legitimate pain issue? I'll have a patient back, and we have a hallway where we put patients with psychiatric conditions or addiction issues. And the reason we do that is for the safety of the people that I work with and the safety of the patients. Some people aren't happy with that, but that's just the way it has to be. So we'll look up everything, and I'll usually bring that in with me to show the patient. But they're not always happy with that, and they'll really, they can escalate at that point. But usually it shows them, that we're on top of things. One of the, when I first started working, one of my first patients that I had with a real addiction problem, I went into the room, and it was someone that I knew. It was a police officer from a local town that came in with back pain. And I looked up his information before I went into see him. And I could tell just by looking up his history that there was a questionable problem. And then when I looked further into the prescription monitoring program, I could see that he was using. And I explained to him what was going on, and I do this with a lot of patients when I come in. I can't prescribe you a medication, unfortunately. They usually get upset, but I have to look at the overall patient and their wellness and everything. And just because you want to come in and you have pain and you want a narcotic, I can't just give that to you. And people don't understand that. There's a reason why a physician has to write a narcotic or write an antibiotic, because we've been trained and we have to make a judgment. And unfortunately, we're not always going to be right. I can have one patient in one room complain to me, calling me a quack physician and escalating and getting upset. And then in the other hallway, I have someone like Krista who's looking for help and wants to be off narcotics, and someone else is blaming the physicians for starting the narcotic crisis. So that's what I'm faced with when I come in. But every year, the chief wanted me to talk a little bit about this. Every 2 years, when I recertify for my boards, I have to document that I went through prescribing training, and it's particularly opioids. So it's not something that's taken lightly with the state right now. So one more thing I wanted to mention, Krista, everything Krista said, I totally believe in 100%. Which starting in the middle school and in high school, you have to stop the addiction. It's basically, if you think about it, if you get on a train and then you ask one of these police officers to pull you off a speeding train, can you do that? That's what's really going on here. You're asking someone like Krista, who comes in here, most of the time the mom or the family brings him to the emergency room and looks at me and says, take care of the problem. I can't take care of that problem. If Krista isn't ready, I can section 12 her, I can section 35 her, I can hold her if I can somehow convince myself that she's somehow a danger to herself. Which most of the time they're not. Just because someone's addicted to a pain medication or to alcohol and they can leave and overdose, that doesn't mean they're suicidal. And I can't hold them on a section 12. I have to explain that to the family. So I think the DARE officer and everything, I know you're joking around a little bit about that, but I think it's more than just looking at the goggles and following. It's a relationship you're building with that officer, so that later on, if you have a problem, you can go to him for help and ask for help there. I think this booklet here is very important. I haven't seen this before, but I think I would love to have something like this in the emergency room to give to these people when they come in, because most of I don't mean to use the term these people, but people who are addicted, because this is something that later on, when they're ready, they can have a resource. Because until someone's ready, you're not gonna do anything with the patient who's addicted.
Well, even when I went to the ER, I went because I called almost every
Mhm.
in the state to get in, and for 2 days, and they did not, no
Yeah.
one had beds. And she would legit lock me in my house. She said, I don't give a beat if you're withdrawing or not, you're not getting it, you're getting you in somewhere. And then at that point, I was like, okay, I want you, and I was so desperate that I went to the ER.
Right.
And they asked me, are you homicidal? I said,
unfortunately, back then, it's true. Back then, we weren't allowed to keep people in the emergency room. We'd do what happens when someone comes in looking for detox. As a physician, I do a medical screening. So basically, my job is to screen someone, make sure there's not an underlying medical condition, that they're safe to go to detox. I'm not actually, I can initiate some treatment, some comfort medications, so they're not suffering while they're waiting to go to detox, but I'm not the addiction specialist. I'm not the one that's going to obviously treat. I will tell you, if you come into the emergency room and I'm working, I'll talk to you till I'm blue in the face trying to get you to stay. I have people, patients telling me, oh, that's nice, you care, you're trying to save the world. No, I'm giving them an option. You can stay. If you don't want to stay, that's fine, you can leave, but you can come back at any time. Anytime you want, you just come back. If we don't have a bed, you can stay here as long as you want, and we'll keep you safe.
Hello.
Greetings. My family, my wife and my 2 daughters and I have been in Mansfield for a long time. Both my girls went through Mansfield High School, came out just fine, best I can tell. 2 of my grandchildren have gone through the Mansfield school system. All is well there. I've got one of my daughters in New Hampshire. She's got 3 sons in schools up there. Things seem fine. One grandson is off in college in Pennsylvania. I don't see him as much as I'd like to. I got 1,000 questions. 2 I'm going to bring to you tonight. First of all, to Chief Baldacchini, can you share with interested people here the first, whatever it was, half dozen slides, the facts and figures that you showed us? I was stunned by that, and I'm not a fast note taker. If there's some way that you and Chief Sellon can make that available to us, I would like to have it. I'd like to be able to share it, but certainly would like to have it for my own reference.
I think that what we could do with regards to that, not to cut you off, but I think that what we could do is we could make it available on the website.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Absolutely. I believe it needs to be seen by people because I know Mansfield is a quiet country town. It was when we came here in '70, and it's all different now. And to see the changes from day to day, you don't know that anything has changed. But you look at the kind of numbers that the chief put out there, yes, it has changed. And we should never forget that looking day to day is different than looking decade to decade, because it is different. I was particularly struck by Steve's observation that by the grace of God, I can tell you, I honestly believe and would avow that we have no chemical dependencies in my family. I do enjoy the occasional glass of bourbon, and I don't mind admitting that, but I don't believe we have any substance abuses in my family. And I cannot possibly tell you how happy that makes me, that I don't have that. My family does not have that problem, because I know from my involvement in organizations in town that it's all around me. And I can't see them. They don't have signs on them that say I've got problems. I guess that's it. I thank you very much for being here. one other question, and I don't know who to address this to. If my daughter in New Hampshire had an issue with questions about what's going on in the high school system up there, how does she make an approach to somebody like you guys to get help for high school students up there? I'm thoroughly pleased for this session, but how can we widen the circle?
I think if it's a school situation, then there's a lot of contacts within the school, starting with the counselors, the guidance counselors. Most high school students have a relationship with a guidance counselor. School nurses are also ones that the kids are oftentimes in and out of their offices. They have relationships there. If the school is fortunate enough to have a school resource officer, another contact, administrators, teachers, I think that parents could reach out to any of those individuals. A lot of our schools, such as Mansfield, started using a state required implementation. It's a screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment, which is a short interview, so to speak, of nurses or counselors to students, and the information is not referred to the state. It's just information, it's a conversation, and unless that student is at risk of harming himself or others, that information can stay between the nurse and the student.
Okay.
And so schools are developing more means to provide access to that information.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there, is the SAFE program
Coalition?
involved in, is there an interstate coalition of state programs?
No, SAFE is one of 28 coalitions in Norfolk County. We're now in Bristol County. But there are coalitions across the state of Massachusetts to handle this. Steve and I were fortunate to go to the National Prescription Drug and Opioid Summit in Atlanta, Georgia 2 years ago, and we were quick to find out that believe it or not, even though we're the hotbed here, we are one of the leading and most progressive states in terms of grassroots efforts. What I would encourage you to do is to reach out to us. We do have contacts in New Hampshire, but I would encourage also your daughter to lean forward to approach superintendents and hope that and if they're not as progressive as this superintendent and willing to admit the problems there, then to push a little harder and to get these community conversations going. Because then it's when people like you, concerned citizens, come forward without any evidence of a problem and say, this is affecting me because it's affecting us. I'm part of this. I want to be part of the solution. That's when real change happens, you know?
Thank you. Thank you all for your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
And to you guys on the front line, as I understand it, thank you for what you do. God bless you.
And thank you for that segue. I wanted to mention that someone, I've forgotten why this is coming up. Both chiefs have empowered their staff to call through to the SAFE Coalition. And officer, he was just in the back. But I've got many calls from officers from our towns who are helping young people, not arresting them. They are helping them get into treatment by calling our lines, staying with them, and by the way, following up with us and following up. These men and women in uniform are dedicated to the health and wellness of the community and not putting people behind bars. I've seen it with my own two eyes. So.
Alyssa.
Hi. I first want to respect and honor everything you guys have said. I really appreciate that. And this is not the first time I've come to one of these seminars. I've listened before, and I've got 18-year-old down to 13-year-old 4 kids. So I don't think I have a problem, but I want to make sure I'm ahead of it. I have 3 kids in the high school, and they know who's smoking pot, and they know who's doing drugs in the school. So I ask, again, I respect all of what you guys are talking about tonight. Maybe it's a little off topic, but what is actually the school teaching the kids? How are the kids getting informed that this is actually dangerous, and that it's really what the problem that they need to navigate themselves.
Thank you. Health classes there is curricula that we use to address substance abuse. Starts very early in Mansfield. Our health classes begin, formal health classes with a specialist teacher begin at 4th grade, and at each grade there is, we touch on it. Definitely it's an opportunity for us to go back and look at our curriculum and see if there's time for updates and revisions. I appreciated being a part of this, because when I was first invited to join this evening and to host it in our school, it was really brought to me as a community event, not so much a school event, and I'm delighted that we've had so many parents here, but we also had people of a lot of different ages and several generations, and I appreciate that. So although we brought this to this community as a community event, being here in the schools, it does give us the opportunity to take a look at our curriculum. I've also noticed that just in the last couple days, Krista's witness statement, powerful, because it really brought to life what we saw on PowerPoint slides. I think also it's interesting to me the number of people who have reached out to me by email. Oftentimes as a superintendent, I get a few complaints once in a while, and I have to tell you that the number of people who have reached out by email to compliment the schools on bringing this topic to our parent population, but also to the community, has been really uplifting to me. So I feel like I've developed some new contacts and a network of people who will be able to help us. And so to your question, sir, we teach about substance abuse. Whether it is enough or whether we can do more, we'll be taking a look at that.
Yeah, it's not enough, because it's never enough, because the statistics say that it's not enough. So the real question is how do we beef that up? Chief, I don't know why there's not a dog walking through the schools every Tuesdays and Thursdays till it's done. I really don't understand why we're not tougher and harder on our kids to stop this, because it's there.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, because what we don't want to do is that we don't want to take such a hardline approach that we turn people off. And that's part of the problem that Krista was just alluding to, is that in the past we took such a hardline approach that we actually turned people off. And I mean as a profession. The key is to basically and the gentleman earlier put it perfectly, it's to widen the circle, and to start building bridges, and to start basically bringing in as many coalition partners as possible, stakeholders and people that basically can bring assets to fore. As far as the dogs go in the school, I mean, we have in the past we have taken the dogs in. There's only so many dogs, and there's only so many certified dogs to go around. So it's a tough situation all around with that in that regard. Oh, as far as bringing the dogs in, as far as the legal issue? No, not at all. I don't think it's, and again though, this is the thing that we need to consider, is that it's not necessarily an issue in the schools. It's an issue it's an issue with certain addictive attributes in our student population that we need to be taking a look at as a community. We need to be identifying earlier and earlier. And then once we identify them both as parents, neighbors, families, and friends, then knowing who we can reach out to start basically that cycle to get them back on the right path. Because by the time they're dealing with Percocets, by the time we're dealing with heroin, one of the statistics that Chief Boldregini pointed out earlier is the numbers, right? The average age range that we're dealing with, 19 to 35. The one thing that we found very interesting is that from 19 to 25, I believe it was, we saw a significant spike from 19 to 25. Then we saw a significant drop between the age of 25 and 30. And then again, from 30 to 35 it was a huge spike as well. Now, whether or not that's indicative of anything, we're not quite sure, but it does give us our target bracket right there. And it also does give us evidence of the fact that what we're not dealing with necessarily is drugs in the school per se. But again, what we need to be looking for, and we need to really be trying to identify, is behaviors that are indicative of something that's going to crop up later on, and it's really tough.
I'm not going to talk about the addictions of marijuana or something like that, but I would just say that if a student can get away with marijuana, cigarettes, and vaping in class because they figured out how to do it, they're going to get to the next level and figure out how to do that as well. They're going to keep pushing the challenge. It's a challenge. They want to get past it. So I think, you know, doing what you can to stop any of the misbehaviors in school is all towards teaching a kid that there's laws, there's respect, there's things that you should be doing, and these are lifestyles you're not supposed to be joining. And whether you don't believe marijuana leads to all this, or you do, they shouldn't be doing all the things that are illegal at the ages that they are, and they should be taught those lessons early on, and they should learn that those things are penalized, or that they have restrictions or whatever after that. And so I would buy a dog for the town and have it in here as everybody walks.
I can get you a quote by the end of this conversation.
$45,000, right? So let me just point out another thing is, again, I didn't even know all about this stuff. I've come to a couple of seminars and I didn't even realize. Just so happens this past Friday I was in the ER with my 16-year-old son. He had a little procedure he had to do, which was going to end up having him checked in for the night. He had a surgical procedure in the ER, and he said he wanted some pain meds, and they started handing him a pill. I said, "Whoa, what's that pill?" OxyContin, 16-year-old, and at Children's Hospital in Boston. And they said, he needs aspirin. It's what he needs. He's not asking for anything greater. And really, I would never, as a parent, even have known about, to question it, to look at it, to say this is not what he wants, and negotiated with my 16-year-old who was logical enough to know, let me try something less. There was a lesson right there, that he knew that this is not something, because I don't know if this is his first time and it's going to lead to something, and it wasn't necessary. And what happened was, when I asked him that question, the nurse, I said, why would you even offer that? She goes, I thought it was strange too, but the doctor said it, so I was just giving it to you. I thought that's what you asked for. So there wasn't enough questioning of the medical staff to say, to the parent, do you think he wants this? So I really do think that there's still not enough action going on to prevent these kids from getting started. So that was just my experience, and of course you guys are not involved with that, but there's still a parent that needs to be involved in questioning everything, and parents really need to be there. That's my statement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Again, thank you for being here. We're fortunate that Jack O'Neill has taped this so that it can be replayed on cable, so that those who could not be here or did not come this evening can see it at a later time. I also want to make mention that, again, we've talked about the Rotary Club, its members, its financial support. Rotary Club has taken on the opioid crisis as being an opportunity for them to educate and be able to contribute to the community, the local community and the greater community. Our school resource officer, Detective Ken Wright, has been here this evening, along with, actually I saw a couple of police officers here, Officer Tom Connors, and also our head nurse for the district, Christine Dooling. So we have had a lot of support here this evening, because this has been an important topic and one that we did want to share with you. Any final comments from anyone on the panel?
I would just say, if you have problems, don't try to face it alone. There are support groups, Learn to Cope. Our number is there. We're happy to talk. Just don't try to do it alone. It is a communal problem. And thank you.
Please come out and talk to us out in the hallway. We'll hang around for a little while.
Yep. Thank you. How about a nice round of applause for our panel? Thank you so much.